And perhaps that's a question you've asked yourself before as you kind of wrestled with this. What does it mean to have faith? What does it actually do? What does it mean? And in Hebrews chapter 11, we get a very good starting point from a sermon standpoint of what faith is. So if you have your Bibles, Hebrews chapter 11, and even though we're only going to read a couple verses here, don't close it because we're going to come back. We're going to finish this chapter up today. Chapter 11, verse 1. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. We're going to stop right there. Faith is the assurance for what we hope for, and it is the conviction of things not seen. This definition tells us what faith has. That faith already possesses the assurance of things hoped for. That means that faith already possesses in the present, in this moment, right now, what God promises to do in the future. Does that make sense? When we think about faith, what we have right now is the promises of what God is going to do in the future. And it is as though we already have it in this moment. That is the kind of assurance that faith has. And the conviction of things that are not seen. So even though we may have struggles, even though we may have problems, faith says that we can have the assurance of God's peace. We can have the assurance of God's salvation, the assurance of God's mercy, the assurance of God's forgiveness in this moment. And it's where we begin with faith. Faith has a two-reality function. There is an inward reality. If you think about faith, we know that faith is personal. Faith is something that we choose to believe, and it is something that has an inward reality. And so let's think about that for just a moment. Inwardly, people of faith can have confidence right now. Did you know that? If we have faith, we can have an inward confidence right now. I share that because this is so important, because so often we look to external things in order to find stability. We worry about the balance in the checking account, the security of our job, how our house is maintained, if our car is reliable, how our relationships are doing. And we look to all of those things for stability. But what faith does is it says we can actually have an inward stability even when everything else is falling apart.
Amen.
Isn't that a good thing to know? But this is the inward part of faith. And it's not that we just turn a blind eye and say, oh, well, I had no idea my car wouldn't start. Or I had no idea that I have holes in the roof. Or I have no idea that the checking account was at zero. And we just turn our eyes to that. It's that even knowing those things, we can still have faith. We can still have the assurance of God's peace and provision in those moments. So there is this inward reality that when everything else is falling apart, it means that as Christians, we shouldn't be panicking. Do you know some panicking Christians? Do you know some worrying Christians? Let's be honest, are you a worrying Christian? Maybe. It's easy to worry, isn't it? Faith says we don't need to worry. Faith says we don't need to panic. Faith says that we don't have to look at all of the external things to make sure that everything is good in our life. It means that even when we experience chaos, that through faith in God, we can have peace. It means that even when we experience injustice, we can have faith in the God who is just. It means that even when people hold grudges against us, does that ever happen? People hold grudges against us? Or perhaps as we hold grudges, if we're going to look that way, that we can have faith in the God who forgives. It means that even when we feel like we can never be good enough, that we can have faith in the one who made salvation possible. You understand some of these inward things that faith does. It brings about a calmness and a certainty of God's promises even when things are falling apart. There is no reason for Christians to run for the hills when we think chaos is coming. Because we have faith in God, and we already have this assurance for what we hope for and conviction of things not seen. It means that for those of us who have faith, that there is no situation in which God cannot work. Think about that. There is no situation in which God cannot work. How many times do we think we have made the ultimate mistake that there is no recovery from this? God can work in that. How often do we think that things are so bad that there is no hope? There is faith that God can work in that. There is no situation in which God cannot work. What that means is that faith says there are no no-win situations. Faith reminds us that we have assurance in times of uncertainty. And the inward reality, this way that we live, this way that we see the world, this lens that faith gives us, creates an outward force. And this is where most of us struggle with faith. Because we look at faith as something that we keep solely on the inside, something that is for us, something to help us through difficult circumstances. Yet as we read the scriptures, faith is not just about something that we keep inside. Faith is something that inside that then creates an outside force. Does that make sense? It's not just something we keep bottled up like the lightning bugs. What a great illustration. It is something that is unleashed. Something that changes the situation. This inward reality of faith creates an outward force. And the things we believe influence the things we do, almost always. The things that we really believe, not just the things that we say we believe, the things that we really believe influence the things that we do. In other words, the things I believe determine my actions. For example, my children believe that they will have consequences if they act up at home. You know why they believe that? Because it's happening. They're not so sure when we go out. And so they try to test that out to see if maybe they can act up when we're outside somewhere and to see if there's consequences. There certainly are, by the way, just in case you're curious. But they're not so certain. And so they're willing to push that envelope because they're in a different environment. And so they believe that maybe they can get away with something, and so their actions show that. And Allie says, okay, Allie's the one that's really pushing it. She is really trying to see what she can do, to see what she knows. And I shared last Sunday, for those of you who were at the Mark, Allie and I had a 10-minute discussion a week and a half ago over the words of a song. It was Hosanna. It was Ho Ho Hosanna. And she didn't quite believe me that those were the words, even though that's what was on the screen. Ho Ho Hosanna. Because what she heard and what she believed it to be was Ro Ro Rosetta. And as I shared with her that Daddy read the words, that Daddy saw the video, she looked at me and said, Daddy, you weren't there. It's Rosetta. And so we had this discussion back and forth. She believed she was right. Regardless of what I said, she believed she was right. She finally recanted and said, well, maybe it's Rosetta. Maybe. But the things that we believe influence our behavior. Whether they're good things to believe, whether they're the correct things to believe, or they're things that aren't accurate at all. They influence the things that we do and the way that we're going to live. Faith knows that there is a difference between what is real, what is tangible, and what can be seen. Faith knows that there is a huge difference between what is real, maybe the unseen, and what can be seen. This inward reality creates an outward force. A possible litmus test for this is to look at your actions. Do they match the things you say you believe? For example, I believe and I will tell you that eating fruits and vegetables are healthy. However, if you were to look at my plate, you would see a number of meals that are lacking those things. Do I believe that they're good for you? Absolutely. Have I read some of the research? Absolutely. Everybody thinks that fruits and vegetables are good for you, right? But do they always make it onto our plates? Not always, right? Actually, Allie loves them. Alex hates them. Allie loves vegetables. She could eat fruits and veggies all the time. Alex, not always. Even if it's something that I tell my kids to do, am I always honest about doing it? Another one is driving the speed limit. And I love this one because it's something that I struggle with. How many of you agree that driving the speed limit is a good idea? How many of you always do it? Nancy, thank you. I am so glad that someone does, because most of us, if you're like me, we set it just fast enough that we feel like we're getting away with something, but not so fast that we get in trouble for it. And even if we, that's true. But even if we might agree and say that we believe driving the speed limit is a good idea, it doesn't mean that we're always going to do it. I share this because this is it with faith. We say that we believe. We know the right things, especially those of us who have grown up in church, we know the right things to say. We know how it should look. We know that there should be fruits and vegetables on our plate. We know that faith should do these things in our lives, yet often in the way we live, we do it the way we've always done it. And our actions look no different from anyone who may not proclaim a faith in God. How about another one? I believe that reading is better than watching TV. And yet when I come home in the evening, it's so easy to flip the TV on and sit there. All of the things that we believe don't necessarily translate to our actions. You need to hear this. Faith is not just believing. It is living like you believe. Does that make sense? It's not just what we say. It's not just the things we know. It's the things that we actually do. I told you not to close your Bibles because we're going to pick back up here. Chapter 11, verse 4, we're going to read about some people who lived their faith. By faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, he still speaks even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, Abraham, even though he was past age, and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, and they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had the opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had received the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. For by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons, and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. By faith Joseph, when he was near his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt, and gave instructions about his bones. By faith Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God, rather to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkling of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell after the people had marched around them for 7 days. By faith the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. Others were tortured and refused to be released, so that they might gain a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, while others were chained and put in prison. They were stoned, they were sawed in two, they were put to death by the sword, they were went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and holes in the ground. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. God had planned something better for us, so that they only together with us would they be made perfect. It is a list, a long list. It is a partial list of faithful men and women who had an inward conviction, and it affected their outward actions. You see this as we go through and compile this list of everyone who has acted. They had to have strong inward convictions. Their faith was more than something they said they believed. It was something they lived out on a daily basis. Their inward beliefs changed their outward behavior. And we read of those who were righteous, those who journeyed obediently, those who were tested by suffering. And they did not give up their inward beliefs. So when we look at what is faith, it is an inward reality that creates an outward force. It is more than sitting here saying, yes, I think I believe in God. I think I believe in Jesus. I think Jesus has forgiven me. It is something that causes us to go out and to live for God. More than just on Sunday morning. But on Sunday afternoon when we're waiting in long lines at a restaurant. How about tipping well at a restaurant even when we think that maybe the service was not as fast as it could have been? What about grumpy Christians Sunday afternoon? One of my biggest pet peeves, by the way. Grumpy Christians Sunday afternoon with coming straight from church, being ungrateful, being mean. You have to look and say, there's a disconnect. How can your faith in a loving God who offers mercy and justice and forgiveness cause actions like this? What we believe needs to impact what we do. And if you look at your actions and you say, no one could look at me and say that I'm a Christian, then there is a problem. There is a break between what we believe and what we do, because obviously we don't really believe it. Does that make sense? We are not going to say, I just believe in God, and then when God calls us to go and we don't go, and say that we have a mature faith. I love Abraham and Sarah. I love their calling, because if you read their calling in Genesis, it is go to the land that I will show you. That is very indirect, right? There is no destination given. There is no GPS coordinates, turn-by-turn instructions. It is go to the land that I will show you. And they packed up and went. That is faith. Or if you look back to the life of Noah, I think they did a great job when they remade Evan Almighty. When they wrote Evan Almighty a few years ago, because it's the story of a modern-day Noah. And everyone in his family thinks he's crazy, and so does he. But let's be honest, building an ark, they had never seen rain. There was no need to build an ark. They did not all know the story of Noah and the ark. We know the story of Noah and the ark. We take it for granted. Noah was writing that story. as God's direction. Talk about faith, inward faith, that determined an outward force. Do you see what faith does? Do you see what faith really is? More than just what I say I believe. It is how I am determined to live. And as we read the list of the ancients, we read the list of those who were faithful and honored by God for being righteous, by going where God led, and by suffering when that's where it led. But in order to preach this passage authentically, we need 3 more verses. They come from chapter 12. Chapter 12. Therefore, and anytime you see the word therefore, you need to go back and see what has happened just before it. But therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, and as part of the church, this is the cloud of witnesses that we are surrounded by. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Here is the image that we read in this passage. The great cloud of witnesses: Abraham, Moses, Noah, Jacob, Isaac, Joseph, the ancients, the modern, those who have come since then. There is this great cloud of witnesses gathered around us, and they are passing off the torch. They are saying it is your opportunity to run the race marked out for you. It is not just your opportunity to decide if you believe in God. It is your opportunity to say that you believe and run and live a life that matches ours. It's not a new call. It's an old call. A call that was made long ago. And in front of you right now is the torch to pick up and run with. The question is, will you do it? Will you pick up and run, or will you pass it off to the next person? What is faith? Faith is not just believing. Faith is living like you believe. Today, I want you to close your eyes, bow your heads, and I want you to picture the great cloud of witnesses gathered around you, passing you the torch, their hands out, that baton ready to go, and all you have to do is grab it. I want you to picture grabbing it and saying, God, I don't know where this is going, but I'm going with you. Let's pray. God, we thank you for this great cloud of witnesses. Father, we thank you for men and women who gave their very lives so that they could go and follow you. God, today as that baton is passed to us, give us the courage to run this race well. Give us anything that might stand, that might keep us from following you, so that, God, that we can run this race well. A race not for our glory, but for your glory. A grace that was started so long ago and that was perfected through your Son, Jesus Christ. Father, help us to run this race. Help us to do more than just say we believe, but help us to live it. And God, if there is anything that stands in our way, anything that is holding us back, any kind of sin, any kind of problem, God, we just ask that you would free us from that right now in this moment. That you would free us from anything that would keep us from running this race for you. Because, God, we know that it is you who are real. That it is you who brings mercy, and forgiveness, and peace, and justice. It is you who we can count on when everything else seems like it's falling apart. God, help us to live in a way that honors you each and every day. Amen. I think if we're going to run that kind of race, we need to do something very difficult, and that's we need to surrender everything to God. Who we are, our idea of comfort, our thoughts of how everything should have gone. And so I would encourage you, as we actually sing a couple verses of I Surrender All, to picture yourself surrendering to God. Anything that stands in the way, anything that has held you back, I would encourage you to surrender it this morning. Decided to surrender everything today, mark your card. Mark your connection card, because I want to walk with you in that. This is something that we run a race together. It's not a bunch of individuals. This is a group effort, the church running as one together. Hey, I am not sure that we have any announcements today, other than a huge thank you to everyone who helped with VBS. And with that, if you were a volunteer at VBS this past weekend, would you plan on staying after church next Sunday so that we can kind of talk about how everything went and just to kind of debrief on that? And then I'll get together with Watson Run and we will go from there. So I have no other announcements. If there's some, check your bulletin and we'll go from there. How about that? Would our ushers please come forward this morning? Larry, would you mind? Thank you.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for the opportunity to give back. All of us, these tithes and offerings will be used to do your work in this world. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Let's stand and close together this morning. come, may we all live a faith that frees. You are dismissed.
Yeah, sure.
Please, for the night?
What?
Registration, but it will registration. It is an We're going to dance here for a little bit.
Go ahead.
Gary.
I didn't know how hard it was.
Are the trays still back here? Are the trays still back here?
Yeah, we're good.
What did you do that
I noticed the changes.
It's got you.
I noticed the changes.
What were you doing yesterday?
It really enhances it. Yeah.
It's staying.
It is. It is. It really is.
Hey, miss, can you shut off the amp for me, please? Well, when we build this, we're supposed to close the wall. And this is supposed to be an area where we can, yeah. That's the plan, is to go from this beam and drywall it in. And then make either sliding doors or a curtain or something. But, you know, we're gonna wait till the church has the money to frame it in, and that way. No, we don't. Yeah.
And these cloth wouldn't do good out in the shed.
That's what I'm wondering.
Right.
I want something like
You want to keep them in the weather, out of weatherproof.
Interesting. Awesome.
Did we want to put this? Oh, did we want to put this back?